Usually when people walk into my courtroom, they look at the floor or they look at their lawyer. But Marcus Sterling walked in looking at the ceiling. He strode through the double doors with a smartphone pressed to his ear, talking loud enough for the back row to hear every word. My bailiff, Quinn, took a small step forward, his thumb hooking into his belt loop. He could feel the shift in the air just as well as I could. Sterling didn't stop at the gate. He walked right past the bar, holding up a hand to my clerk. Not a wave, but a command to wait. He was arguing about zoning permits and bulldozers, completely ignoring the silence sign hanging 3 feet from his head. I sat back. I reached for my mug. My daughter Christina brewed the coffee extra dark this morning because she knew it was going to be a long day, and the bitterness helped ground me. I just watched him. Let me tell you, there is a specific kind of silence in a courtroom right before things go wrong. In the gallery, a young mother instinctively pulled her child onto her lap, shielding him. Behind her, an older veteran sat up straight, his jaw tightening as he watched the display. 2 construction workers in neon vests exchanged a look that said, "Here we go." Sterling finally finished his call. He didn't apologize. He approached the podium, checking his expensive watch like he was late for something more important than justice. I assumed my assistant handled this already. He looked at the clerk, then finally, vaguely, toward the bench. "Let's make this quick. I have a groundbreaking at noon." I stayed silent. Sometimes you have to let people show you exactly who they are. He tapped his foot, looking annoyed that I hadn't started speaking yet. "Is there a VIP lane for this?" I asked Marcus Sterling to state his name, and the sound he made wasn't a word. It was a heavy sigh of theatrical exhaustion. He leaned one elbow on the podium, slouching just enough to show he didn't care, and looked at me as if he were explaining a simple concept to a slow employee. He admitted to the violation immediately. He didn't try to hide it. He said blocking the fire lane was a logistical necessity because his blueprints were heavy and he didn't have time to walk from the garage. The room didn't like that. In the second row, the veteran shifted in his seat, his heavy boots scraping loudly against the floor, a gritty grounding sound in the quiet room. Behind him, the 2 workers in neon vests shook their heads, and I heard one whisper, "I got towed for less." I tried to explain the safety hazard. I tried to explain that fire lanes aren't suggestions for convenience, but Sterling cut me off. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a leather checkbook, waving it at me dismissively. He didn't see a crime, he saw a transaction. He told me the fine was just a fee for premium parking. My father always taught me that you can judge a man's character by how he treats people who can't do anything for him. And right now, Sterling was showing us exactly who he was. Between you and me, arrogance has a specific texture, and it was filling the entire room. He didn't like being corrected. He didn't like waiting. And when I didn't immediately name a price, he snapped, "Do you know what my hourly rate is compared to this ticket?" My bailiff shifted his stance, his hand dropping to his side. "I built half this city. I should be allowed to park where I want. You're focusing on a hydrant. I'm focusing on the skyline." I placed my pen down on the bench, slowly. The silence that followed was heavy, but Marcus Sterling didn't notice. He was too busy checking a notification on his phone screen. I ignored the checkbook he had waved at me. It brought to mind a lesson my father taught me about the neighborhood milkman. A man who thinks he is too big for the rules is usually too small for the job. Sterling rolled his eyes. Quinn, my bailiff, stepped 1 foot forward, his hand drifting from his side to his buckle, a silent check of readiness. My clerk hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keys, afraid to make a sound that might break the standoff. I asked him about the previous warnings. He smirked. He told me that rules are suggestions for people who lack vision. Let me tell you, the air in the room was thin. In the gallery, the young mother covered her child's ears, not because of the volume, but because of the tone. I asked if he was aware of what happened while his car was parked there. He shrugged. He checked his watch again. "If the city needs money, just ask me for a donation. I don't read signs, I read contracts." "Are we done with the lecture series?" I didn't waste my breath arguing with Marcus Sterling. I simply turned to the clerk and gave a small nod. "Play the footage." File, name, dispatch, cam A77, timestamp 14:02:12. The monitor flickered to life, and it wasn't just a parking photo. Dispatcher, engine 4 is blocked. Repeat, blocked. Captain, move, we're on foot. Drag the line. the room filled with the sound of frustrated air horns and sirens. On the screen, firefighters in full gear were jumping off the truck, running heavy hoses around the sleek black luxury sedan blocking their path. The gallery gasped. The workers in the back stopped their murmuring immediately. The veteran closed his eyes tight, a look of genuine pain on his face as he listened to the chaos. We all watched the timer on the screen. 12 seconds, 20 seconds, 40 seconds. That's when I saw the shift. Sterling stopped tapping his foot. He swallowed hard. His jaw shifted slightly to the left, a small crack in the armor. He wasn't the architect of the skyline anymore. He was a man realizing he had lost control of the narrative. I didn't say anything. I just let the siren wail from the speakers fill the silence. That angle makes it look worse than it was. They got around it eventually. I was only inside for coffee. You know, Marcus Sterling looked at me like I had just spoken a foreign language when I read the fire marshal's report aloud. I watched the blood rush into his face, turning his complexion a deep, blotchy crimson. But let me be clear, it wasn't shame, it was rage. I had just told him that the 40-second delay caused by his car prevented the crew from reaching a kitchen fire before it jumped the wall to a nursery next door. Most people, when they hear something like that, they shrink. They collapse inward. They feel the weight of the tragedy they almost caused. But Sterling didn't shrink. He expanded. He felt attacked. He felt that the universe was unfairly inconveniencing him with consequences. He looked at the screen, then at me, and his breathing got loud, ragged breaths that echoed in the microphone. He slammed his hand on the defense table so hard the water pitcher rattled. I am not responsible for traffic. He stood up abruptly, and the chair screeched against the floor. A terrible, high-pitched sound that made everyone wince. Quinn was there instantly. He didn't rush. He just appeared, a wall of authority stepping between the podium and the bench, one hand raised, palm out. He didn't have to say a word. The room recoiled. In the front row, the young mother didn't just cover her child's ears this time. She physically turned her body, creating a shield between her son and the man shouting at the bench. Behind her, the two workers leaned forward, their elbows digging into their knees, fists clenched tight. Between you and me, I've seen men like Sterling before. They are used to controlling every room they walk into, and when they lose that control, they don't know how to act. They panic. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I leaned back, channeling my mentor, Judge Harrison, who taught me decades ago that the person who has to shout is usually the person who has already lost the argument. I kept my voice steel-reinforced, calm, and low. Mr. Sterling, I said, letting the silence do the heavy lifting, 5 minutes ago, you waved a checkbook at me. You asked for a price. He was panting now, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an ally that wasn't there. But there isn't a check in that book, I continued, that can buy back the time those firefighters lost. You can't wire transfer 40 seconds back onto the clock. Sterling tried to speak. He tried to summon that corporate confidence, that bully demeanor that probably worked in boardrooms and zoning meetings. He opened his mouth to interrupt me, to talk over me, to explain why I was wrong. But his voice wavered. It cracked. This is a witch hunt against success. He was shouting, but the power was gone. He sounded small. You're trying to make an example out of me. I just watched him. I waited. My lawyers will eat this court alive. Marcus Sterling stopped shouting and looked around the room. And for the first time since he walked in, he actually saw where he was. He looked for his assistants, his lawyers, or anyone on his payroll who usually nodded when he spoke, but they weren't there. He was alone. He looked at the gallery. He saw the mother clutching her child, staring at him not with anger anymore, but with a quiet, heavy disappointment. He saw the two workers in neon vests who weren't intimidated by his suit. They just looked at him with pity. He saw the veteran who didn't blink. Sterling realized he had no allies here. He slowly sank back into his chair. He didn't smooth his suit jacket this time. He didn't check his phone. The fight just drained out of him, leaving him looking smaller than he was when he stood up. He was no longer the architect of the skyline. He was just a defendant in a municipal courtroom. My clerk let out a long, audible breath, a heavy exhale that seemed to mirror the entire room. In the second row, the veteran gave a sharp nod, just a single chin drop of approval that the shouting was over. I leaned in over the bench. I lowered my voice. because I didn't want to speak to the CEO anymore. I wanted to speak to the human being sitting behind the defense table. I told him about the social contract we all sign just by living in a community. I explained that the road belongs to the grandmother needing an ambulance just as much as it belongs to the developer needing a permit. It reminded me of something my mentor, Judge Alvarez, told me during my first year on the bench. A city isn't made of concrete and steel. It's made of people relying on each other to follow the rules. Sterling looked down at his hands. They were resting on the table, still and empty. You built the building, Mr. Sterling, but you forgot the people who live inside it. Between you and me, that was the moment the fever finally broke. The tension in the room dissolved into a collective understanding. The mother in the front row relaxed her shoulders, creating a little space between her and her child. The workers unclasped their fists and leaned back on the bench. Even Quinn, my bailiff, relaxed his posture, stepping back to his usual spot by the wall. Sterling didn't argue. He didn't mention his hourly rate. He looked up at me, and his eyes were clear. I didn't know about the nursery. He looked over his shoulder at the gallery, really looking at them this time. Is everyone okay? I looked down at the docket, then back up at Marcus Sterling. The arrogance that had filled the room an hour ago was completely gone, replaced by a quiet acceptance. I pronounced the sentence clearly, a $500 fine, the statutory maximum. But for a man like Sterling, money is just paperwork. So I added something that actually costs him something, time. 40 hours of community service, I said, specifically cleaning and maintaining the fire hydrants in the district you blocked today. My bailiff Quinn relaxed his stance against the wall, knowing the danger had passed. I took off my reading glasses and folded them on the bench, a small ritual I always do when the official business is finished, but the human business is just starting. Sterling nodded. His head was lowered, humbled. He reached for his phone on the table, but this time he didn't check an email or look at the time. He just slid it into his pocket without looking at it. Let me tell you, that was a bigger victory than the fine. The two workers in the back row looked satisfied, nodding to one another. The young mother in the front caught my eye and smiled. Even the veteran in the second row seemed to exhale, his shoulders dropping an inch. I gave Sterling one last thought to carry out the door. Success is not measured by what you can get away with, but by what you contribute when no one is watching. He looked me in the eye, and for the first time I saw a man, not a brand. I'll do the hours, myself. Thank you, Your Honor.